Blind Nil Audio.
I'm Alex L.
I'm Libby Delana. Welcome
to This Morning Walk podcast.
Hi, Dario.
What's going on, Libby? How are you?
Well, I'm really, really good now. It's been a minute for you and me.
I know. When was the last time we spoke? Well, we met in 2020, right?
Yeah, in the midst of the pandemic.
Like in the beginning.
In the beginning.
Like in
I
that
know.
first little
Moment.
crack when we thought we could meet again.
I know, on a regular basis, and then we all went home and closed the doors for a minute.
Yeah. Between OG and Delta.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Oh my God. Yeah, so we met during the pandemic on set. I was just thinking about it this morning as I was walking, and I was thinking we danced, we talked about music and fashion, we
Absolutely.
talked about truth and abundance. I remember talking to you about
Ooh.
Milton Glaser and his
Yes.
concept of abundance. What was his wonderful phrase? I'm going to get this. I forgive me if I don't get this exactly right, but it's something along the lines of, and I remember talking about this with you for probably hours. There are good enough ideas out there in the universe, um, enough for nourishment. And his sort of philosophy was there's enough for everybody. And I remember you saying that you had this really beautiful concept of abundance. I mean,
Ooh,
I
4
don't know.
years
I
ago.
didn't. Yeah, I know it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
But in any case, just as background, we had a great conversation. We danced. I am, and was in awe of you, in awe.
Oh, thank
And
you.
well, I guess tapping into this concept of abundance, walk stars. The way I think of you, Dario, is someone who has really sort of an abundance of identities. Sure,
Mm.
I very easily could talk about you as a photographer, and you are that exquisite, but I would also say you're a writer, you're a sculptor, you're a podcast host, a teacher, a casting director, a fashion icon. Honestly, you're the CEO of a important and beautiful podcast called The Imagination of the if I get this right, the
Institute
Institute of
of Black
Black
Imagination.
Imagination. Yes. And so I just think of you as someone who has this beautiful concept of life as being abundant, and that you yourself live into that space. Who inspired you? How did you
That's
get here?
interesting. Um, well, first of all, actually, the Institute of Black Imagination is a whole organization that then has
Yes.
a podcast. But, when we were starting, or let me just be honest, when I was starting and I didn't have any money,
Yes.
I was like,
Yes.
well, what can I do now? Right? Because I had
Right.
all of these books and I wanted to share them with people, but had no money. So I started the podcast to begin
Yes.
to, you know, coagulate this idea of
Yes.
what even is Black imagination.
Yes.
Um, and in many ways, if I'm going to say who inspired me, that may be a good kind of like lens through which to like interrogate that, which is,
Mm.
the multitude of people who have existed
Yes.
in skin that looks like mine and beyond, really, to be honest, if I'm going to be
Yes.
clear. It's really just the collective body of human experience that
Mm-hmm.
inspires me, and shows me ways of being, um, paths, things like that. But I think underneath all of that is really just a curiosity, a
Yes.
curiosity about myself, a curiosity about the world around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can't really recall our conversation around abundance back in 2020, but what I will say, kind of come from my current vantage point in 2024, you know, the abundance is almost an artifact of curiosity
Mm. That's beautiful.
because
Yeah.
in the constant seeking, and you always find,
Yes.
even if it's seeking yourself, right? You always discover more about yourself, more about what you can do, more about what interests you. In the seeking and your curiosity about the world around you, you always find more, even if you specialize in, I don't know, something as specific as like, I don't know, neurobiology, you'll never know everything, right? And so abundance in many ways is kind of an artifact of curiosity. It's like in the seeking and constantly finding, the equal of that equation is abundance, right? Like it's just like obvious, right? Because there's always
Right.
more. So,
Right.
but I think it's in the testing and the trying of yourself
Yeah.
and, of the universe, of God, or whatever your um, kind of nomenclature around, something outside of your skin. um, it's in the testing and the trying of that abundance is proven, right? And so I think that's how I would interpret abundance at this point.
Yeah. No, it's so beautiful. As you were speaking, I was thinking that abundance is the sister to curiosity or the brother to curiosity. That out of
Mm,
that, as you were saying, out of that curiosity is this world of information and experiences and people and mindsets. There's just, yeah. Abundance of curiosity is, I don't know, that's how I think of you. I think of you as
mm.
someone who has that kind of outlook on life and that appetite for both those things, abundance and curiosity. I think it's um, okay. So who inspired you? Who are the people that brought you to that place in this world? I mean, I will say
So,
that being on set with you was such. It was first we had a wonderful time, but it was a class for me. It was a philosophical. I just remember
mm,
having really beautiful conversations and thinking when leaving. It'd be so interesting to know how you arrived. Walk us through that. Walk us where did this begin?
yeah, I mean, I would say, there's one particular person who greatly inspired me, which is Jeffrey Holder, who is the
Mm,
artist from whom I acquired these 2,000 books. And for listeners, um, you
yes,
can
tell us
Google
that
Jeffrey
story.
Holder. It starts
Yeah,
with a G, but he was, a dancer, choreographer, singer, painter, sculptor, director, actor, all of the things, like literally D, all of the above. And and many people may know him from like Seven Up commercials, like I guess in like the 70s or 80s or 90s or something. But if you're familiar with The Wiz, which is actually currently on Broadway right now, that is Jeffrey Holder's brainchild. So he was the original director and costume designer for The Wiz, won Tony for both of those.
yeah,
Um, and in many ways, most of my life, I've been kind of looking for a mentor. I grew up in the suburbs of St. Louis, um, you know, went to very traditional, American, like public
yeah.
high school, right? Predominantly white neighborhood, 3,500 people in my high school, like the whole, like, the parades, the whole thing. And, and having a good time, right? Like enjoyed myself again, very curious, like always taking classes, um, you know, taking Japanese, taking Spanish, taking, all the things, just very curious about the world. And, but always looking for this mentor, right? Like looking for this person who was existing in this kind of multitude of ways. And it wasn't until I encountered Jeffrey and then his
Mm,
archive, right? This entire, room stacked to the hilt with books and costumes and sculptures. Um, did I find an individual that was moving through the world in the way in which I
mm.
wanted to
Yes,
move through the
yes.
world, which was in many ways undefined, um,
Mm,
and finding my own internal resistance every time either I was put into some type of box or even I put myself, into some type of
mhm.
box.
Yeah.
Um, and I think if we speak about who inspires me or what inspires me, I don't know. I think like being alive and looking around, like inspire. Like
Right.
there's so many inputs, right? There's so
Right.
many inputs. I can't really narrow it down to a single person, but I will say what I am learning, my constant pursuit, I think over time is to trust my own self and like
Mm,
trust my voice. And, when I'm in a career and I can start to feel like it waning or like my curiosity is leading me somewhere else, to actually listen to that and begin to pursue, my other very interests. And in many ways, by having a kind of a palette of options
yeah.
of self-expression, it allows me to just kind of go where the energy is flowing at any given moment,
Mm,
right? And
love. Yeah.
knowing that energy moves along the path of least resistance, I just flow where there's least resistance, right? I'm like, well, this seems to be resonating right now, like
Yeah.
I'll go in this direction, right? And I will say that, in many ways, reality, what we consider reality, our own personal reality, meaning our perception, our individual perception, is really a conversation, right? It's a
Mm,
conversation more than a fixed,
right.
static
Yeah.
engagement with the world. It is constantly reflecting back to us information, our own internalities, right? Like what's going on in the inside, right? And in many texts, right, it says like as above, so below, right? As
Right.
within, so
Right.
without. Like these things. And so if you're attuned, if you're listening, if you're open enough to understand that, you know, not all messages come in words, right? Not
Right. Oh,
all
that's so
like
beautiful. Yeah.
notifications come in a ding,
Ding.
right? That there are multiple ways to that we contain a multitude of intelligences. And if one, so I think mine is one of constant attunement. But I say all of this to say who I am and how I have become is because of that conversation over time. My third grade, my fourth grade music teacher hearing me sing and say, "Oh my God, you have a beautiful voice." I had no fucking idea. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, everybody in my
Right.
family sings, whatever.
Right.
And then she gives me like the solo. And then that is the beginning of my performance career. And I began performing professionally when I was, 15. So many things about myself have been about things that were reflected back to me
Yeah. Yeah.
and whatever resonated, right? I'm like, oh, you guys like the photos I'm taking? I mean, I think this is just a cool thing. I never thought that it was, but it was what was reflected back to me. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And it's kind of through that, and it's this kind of balance between like an external conversation and an internal conversation that I've just kind of
Yeah.
taken up, a little room in all of these different spaces.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. I think, um, actually, the reason I asked that was I was thinking about your photographing Lana Turner and
Mm,
the icon that she is.
yeah.
And so it led me to a couple of questions. A, how did photography, I mean, that conversation has been a sort of a dominant narrative in your conversation with the world. Certainly only one piece of that conversation, but um, well, tell us how did you find photography, or how did photography find you? And then tell us about photographing Lana. I mean, I think those images, I mean, they're just so iconic. You did a beautiful job of acknowledging her, seeing her, and then your eye is just so exquisite. So how did
Oh,
photography
thank you.
find you?
Yeah, so photography found me like most things find me haphazardly. So
Yes.
I was a performer still at the time, acting, and I'd go on tour and you just buy some digital camera, you're taking photos of like flowers when you're in the Caribbean, just tourist stuff.
Yes.
And I would just always share them with my family when I came back, just like slideshows and shit. And then once I booked a trip to Europe, and it was like a 3-week trip. It was my first time kind of going to mainland Europe and all the real sites. I'd been in London before, and I was like, I want to buy a really nice camera. because I want to make a calendar or something for my mother, like I want to make sure these images are great. And my friend at the time convinced me to buy a DSLR, which I had never heard
Right.
of. I didn't know you could spend $1,000 on a camera and still not have a lens. Like, this is all news to me.
Right.
And prior to this, most of my life, I always thought that academia and art were siloed. Like, you had to make a choice. Like, it was one or the other. So I was constantly hedging this fence. Even, you know, my undergrad degree is like, one was in psychology, the other was in theater. Like, so so even then I couldn't make a choice. Like, I had to double major because I was like, I want the
Right.
artistic part, but I need like the psychology. And so when I get to Europe and I have this camera and I'm teaching myself how to use it, it was the first time where these two kind of worlds collided, where this kind of like
Beautiful.
academic, scientific ratio, logic brain came together with this idea of like something that was creative, right? A creative output. And I just kind of enjoyed it, right? Like, I kind of enjoy like playing with, shutter speed and, aperture and all these things and the effects that it could create. And then I came back to the States and very practically was like, okay, how am I going to pay for this expensive ass camera? Well, maybe one day I'll be good enough to take headshots and people would actually pay for them. And then I can, pay for this camera back. So then I just started shooting all my actor friends and, shooting headshots and, I guess became pretty good at it and made definitely more money back than I paid for the camera. But over time, kept finding that I kept wanting to say more and more with the lens, right? Well, more and more inside the frame. And so I ended up going to grad school at SVA. There, I regressed to shooting film. Again, just my own personal assignment, my own personal challenge. Like, I started shooting digitally. How will changing the frame inform my eye? And so I bought a twin lens reflex camera, which is those cameras that have like the two lenses stacked on each other in a square format. And for me, it just made me think of like old timey portraits. I was like, this just makes me think of old timey portraits. So I started to like rent backdrops, like just tarp and throw them up on the street and just like make a mini studio and like a portable studio and start taking photos of my friends, like in their cool clothes and stuff, like literally on 126th Street and Morningside Avenue in Harlem.
Beautiful.
Around this time, and I'd been going to church. My father's a minister, and I'd always seen this woman, Miss Turner, and who was always dressed impeccably. And we had a mutual friend, Randall, who introduced me to her. And I really wanted to borrow some hats from her for a fashion shoot that I was doing for maybe when I was in grad school. And sitting with her and like just the way she moves through life, right? Just her own aura. I was like, oh my God, it has to be you. Like, I have to shoot you. And then she showed me her wardrobe, and I was like, oh, okay, all right. So I'm shooting you and your hats and your clothes, and this is going to take us 5 years because this is going to take forever. She has over 500 hats. And so that's how the project began. And so I would just style her in these. So I would style her in ways that are maybe a little bit more editorial than she would perhaps style herself, even though she's quite stylish. And so it was really, again, a collaboration between her and myself. And we would just do these really beautiful portraits. Again, me not understanding what I'm doing, right? Like, what's happening. I'm not understanding the significance of it. I think Carrie Mae Williams recently said, a lot of times when you're creating art, you have no idea what you're doing and you don't know what's going to come of it. You're just doing, right? And so Miss Turner and I are at church, and she introduces me to this woman, Deborah Willis, who I didn't know and don't know anything about. And she's like, hey, Dario, could you show Deb those photos that you took of me? And I was like, yeah, sure. I pulled them up on my phone, showed them to this woman, Deb Willis. And Deb Willis was like, oh, these are beautiful. She's like, could you email those to me? And I was like, yeah, sure. Got her email address, email her the photos. Again, this is just a personal project, as I'm ending grad school. And the next email that Deb sends me in reply is an intro to a gallery.
Yes.
I had no idea I was an artist. I had no idea this was art. I didn't know any of these things. lo and behold, Deb Willis, I don't know, for listeners, this is Deborah Willis, who is the head of the photo department at NYU Tisch. She's an incredible historian, artist, and scholar in her own right. She essentially has
Yes.
single-handedly written the entire history of like Black photography in America through her research. If you've heard of the artist Hank Willis Thomas, who is also a major figure in the art world, that's her son. So this is who I was introduced to at church.
Right.
Again, completely clueless, had no idea. And so that's really what began or catalyzed, this burgeoning career in both art and photography. But what I would say is the through line through my work, and although photography is a part of it and has become a significant part of it, I think it's also because it's the most easily understood part of it.
Yes.
Um, it's the most like, oh, he's a photographer. Like you can make sense of that. And there's also like products or artifacts that like show that.
Right.
But from my internal kind of compass, what my life and curiosity over time, that's what I like to call a career, my curiosity over time, has really been is increasing levels of impact. Because when I was an actor, what really began to poke out, or let me say, kind of rub away at like the luster of like being a performer, was the realization that I wasn't helping anybody. I'm like, I can get, maybe people can forget about their problems for 2 hours while I'm here on stage, and then they go right back into them. I have no effect. There's like no way that I can make people's lives better from up here, right? For me, right? There are other people who, for them, that is their ministry, their gift, their act of service. And so for me, like, then, in photography, it becomes a little bit more intimate. And I kind of started to view, even when I was doing headshots, as a type of ministry, because what I discovered in that process was I was able to reflect back to people a version of themselves that maybe they didn't even recognize, which I would be so confused by. They'd be like, wait, like that's not me. And I'm like,
that's me.
Babe, babe, it's you. Like it's you. Like there's nothing else in the photo but you. So it's you. And but it was through conversation, deep listening, asking people what their highest version of themselves were, what role did they want to be, right? Like even if you're in the ensemble now, like where are you going? Because I'm going to shoot you for where you're going, not where you are. That way, when you walk in, the casting director sees you as that, and then it also gives you something to live into, right? And so in that way, it was like a really dope kind of like impact in ministry, right? Like I'm realizing like, oh, I'm allowing people to see the best versions of themselves that even they may not recognize just yet, but also like how to really distill something down to like the essence of like a person, right? Like how to capture someone's essence like in a photograph, right? And then when you look back, right, the repeated practice of that, right? Like I'm literally like doing 1,000 of these, right? So, and so that was a level of impact. And then when you move into like, commercial and editorial, then you can have that impact at scale, right? Now it's like, oh, this story that I'm telling, these stories that are inside me, the ways in which I bring things together can now affect people on a global scale, right? That's very, so when I'm shooting the campaigns for Alvin Ailey, and I'm thinking about like, we were shooting during COVID, and it was like, what held us together through COVID? And I was like, well, it was love and community, right? Like that's what kept us alive in many ways. And so wanting to show that through the lens of, their own history and Blackness and the bodies and, the technique and the, the training and the discipline, right? And so I'm thinking of these images that can reflect this idea of Black love and community, knowing that because of Alvin Ailey and because of their ad buy and because of the scale of the company, these images are going to be on every bus in New York City. People are going to be standing on the subway platform at 59th Street, and these images are just going to wash over them, right? Because you know how they just take over the whole station at one time, of these two beautiful Black people holding each other in an embrace. These are images that we don't always get to see. These are images that we don't always get to witness. But what they do is then begin to repopulate the data set of information, how we understand each other, right? So there's that. And then as I have, expanded into this place of design and design theory and philosophy, which I really started back in 2016, just unbeknownst to most people. I was kind of quietly looking at it. And then this beautiful ability to do this fellowship at Harvard last year. For me, in many ways, design then becomes the next evolution of impact. Because for me, when I'm looking at the world through the lens of design, it kind of becomes ones and zeros for me. It's actually the clearest vision. Photography is one type of visioning, creative direction, right? Directing these fashion shows, and community experiential, right, is another type of visioning, another type of like psychology and kind of like communal love. But for me, when I'm thinking about impact and like design, I'm like, well, that's everything actually. Now we've gotten to the ground of being. And, my definition of design is simply the technology to bring thought into space and time.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Design is merely just a series of mechanisms to translate what is once immaterial into materiality. So everything that we're visioning right now, for listeners, just look around your room. You can look at your clothes. Literally every single thing that you are visioning, from the floor to the chair you're sitting on, to the glasses on your nose, to the pants on your leg, to the sidewalk you walked in, the street you drove down, the city you live in, the building you find yourself in, was all once an idea. Was all once an idea in someone's head, which then means we are living in thought. We're living in embodied ideals. We're living in solid consciousness. And so then the next question is, well, then whose thought and whose consciousness?
Whose decisions?
And what does it mean?
Yes.
Right, and that's a very easy answer. And so for me, then the question is, well, then what are we missing out on? Because we've been living in such a narrow band of humanity's imagination. What does it look like to embolden and empower the imagination of others, right? Like, do cities even have to look like this? Right? And then for me, then design extends, with that kind of first principles definition, design then extends beyond just like the built or natural environment, which we understand as, architecture or graphic design or urban design or landscape architecture or, coding even, or website design, UX, UI. These are all ways in which we understand design. But then for me, design then extends into language, because language is also a translation of thought, right? And we don't think about language. We don't think about the way in which the language we speak is actually shaping our reality. It's because we're forced to articulate our experience through this medium, kind of like an extruder, or if you have Play-Doh and you put the little triangle piece in the front, everything comes out in the shape of a triangle. So language is like that, right? If you speak multiple languages, you understand there are multiple ways to, even in many ways, when you switch from one language to the next, you kind of shift your paradigm, kind of shift reality in order to like access this new world. There are languages for which what we consider inanimate objects have pronouns: trees, rivers, rocks. If English was a language that gave pronouns or primacy or an essence to what we consider inanimate, would climate change even be a thing? How would we be engaging with our environment? So these are things that I'm interrogating as well. I also think of, identity also as design, right? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman, American, lawyer, middle class, white, Black, mother, right? These are all concepts. These are all things that existed before we got here, but were not designed with us in mind, right? I'm sure there are parts of you, Libby, if you identify as women, that don't line up to this external idea of women. I'm sure listeners the same, right? And so I think many of the frustrations that we find, both internally and externally in the world, have to do with us, cutting off pieces of ourselves or trying to squeeze or stretch ourselves to fit within these pre-existing design constructs. And so for
Yes.
me, what I love about that, what I love about design is that it then provides a language of understanding that for me in many ways goes all the way down to, like the Planck scale of, measuring things, which is like the smallest, measurement we
Unit of
have.
measure.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, yeah, exactly. All the way to like, the macro. And then so many things then fall away when you get there, right? With these identities are like white or black. You're like, what are we even talking about? Like, that's so stupid. Like, I mean, it is, right? Like, yes, I understand
Right.
how it functions. I understand that it has deleterious effects on the lives of individuals, but it's kind of basic and really strange. Like, it's a strange way in which, I say, like, if you're watching this, I don't know if this is video as well, the only thing black in the frame really is the shirt that I'm wearing.
Right.
But if someone looks at me on the street, or even I self-identify, right, as black, and it's so weird because if, like, what is it, like 70-80%, a great majority of our brain is geared towards vision, right? Like, so much of our brain is geared
I
towards
didn't
the
know
sense
that.
of vision.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. I mean,
Right.
distance, perception, like, I mean, there's
Right.
so much that vision, provides for. So if so much of that is dedicated towards visioning, it's literally how we survive. Why is it unquestioned that we look at a thing, right? You look at me, and then you call a thing it's not. Like, you can see that I am not black. You can see that this is black, and yet you call me black. You're completely ignoring your vision, calling a thing it's not, and you're like not curious about that.
Yeah.
What does it mean what does it mean when I say that? What does it mean when I call you white? What am I actually saying? Because I know what white is, and you're actually not white, but I'm calling you white. So then what is that thing I'm saying about you?
Right.
And we don't articulate that. We're not curious about that. So anyway, so for me, this is why, for me, the through line really through all of these seemingly disparate modalities of being is really a progression of impact, perhaps a clarifying of an idea
Beautiful.
through various
Beautiful.
mediums, and then understanding that, in hindsight, all of those are required in order to do the work that's ahead of me.
Mm. Mm. Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. I'm having these flashbacks to being on set with you and having these philosophical conversations, which are, gosh, I could talk to you all day. I mean, yes, we were taking pictures, but one of my
That's just an
favorite,
excuse. That's just an excuse to get people
I
together. You know what I mean?
I know,
It's just an
totally.
excuse to have the conversations.
One of my favorite quotes of yours, I don't even remember where I found it, but you said something, I think this is right. I'm going to read this because I don't remember precisely where I found this. But what I aim to do as an artist, I think ultimately to set people free. And I don't mean that in some savior complex way, but I mean free to be themselves, to freedom to find their space in their own minds, to access their own imaginations, and to dissolve some of the illusions we find ourselves in. That's just what you were saying. Your role in this is to set people free and to dissolve some
Mm,
of these illusions. Well said.
damn. I'm like, wait, where was that? That was good.
I,
I was meditated
so,
up, baby. Like, I was in it.
but I love that the freedom to find themselves in their own minds, to access their own
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
imagination, and to dissolve some of the
Mm-hmm.
illusions we find ourselves in.
Yep. Absolutely.
I mean,
Totally.
right? I mean,
Still
that's what
true.
you still
Still
true,
true.
right?
Yeah.
Well,
Return to people a sense of their agency.
that's right. And validity in that agency and truth
Yeah.
in those spaces. I think that's so powerful. Well, we can't conclude this conversation without acknowledging and actually when we were on set, the day we showed up to shoot, there was a full page article about you in the New York Times about it. Do you remember this? I think I rolled in all
That was
sweaty and
so
kind of
crazy, Libby. First of all, I'm so glad. that was where I was when all of that was happening. To have you and like Chai and just like small team, but like to be held in that moment while literally chaos was happening. But go for it, hit it, yeah.
No, you tell us. So tell us what that was all about. It's sort of the first time you and I had met, but I remember feeling just so happy for you. It was a really, it was a, sh- it was an important moment, and it felt like it was perhaps an important milestone or moment in your life. So, I would like to hear it from your perspective. Tell us what happened.
Well, you know what's so funny, Libby? First of all, I think it's like I am one again, always listening, right? Always listening. I don't know if you know, it's almost exactly 4 years
Yes.
since that happened. Like,
Yes.
I think it came out the art the cover came out like July
July.
14th,
Right.
and I think I shot it on June 20th. I think
Mm.
we shot it on June because it was a 3 week turnaround. It was very fast. So that we're even having this conversation 4 years later is like not lost on me, right?
Right.
Because there are many cycles, right?
Yes.
Multiple cycles, many cycles that live within us and without us. So, um, what Livy is, Livy is referring to is I became the first Black photographer to shoot a cover for Vanity Fair in its, I think, 106-year history, with the cover of Viola Davis. And not only was it a cover of Viola Davis, but I really used this cover and this moment as a way to speak to the moment,
Yes.
because at the same
Yes.
time, the George Floyd protests were
Right.
happening. That was like May 20th or something like that. So maybe like a month. And so really trying to use this cover as my own type of protest, my own way of
Yes.
speaking to um, the state of blackness in the United States, but
Mm.
also then in many ways wanting to offer a kind of salve, right? A type of balm that, even despite this American history, that beauty is still possible, right?
Yes. Yes.
And that it's glorious and that
And
it's
it's
stunning
important.
and
Yes.
it's mysterious and
Yes.
it's rich, that these are the results of that struggle. And in many ways, directly after that, like a month before that, I think I started the podcast. Like I started the podcast on
Yes.
May 31st of
Yes.
2020,
Yep.
the Institute of Black Imagination. And so for me, in many ways, that cover uh, is Black imagination,
It
is
is.
what it looks like. If we're going to talk about what is Black imagination, it is the beauty that comes from resistance, actually. Like it's
Yes.
produced through. Um, and I'll just say this and then I'll move forward. I
Mm.
speak a lot, when I speak about Black imagination, I speak about this. There's multiple ways in which to understand it or how I articulate it, but um, there is this scent called oud, O-U-D. Many people it's musky, it's beautiful, it's fragrant, mostly out of the Middle East, North Africa. And it's so rare, it's called liquid
Yes.
gold, like rare, rare, rare. But it's a tree resin.
Right.
That's what oud is. And the tree resin comes from the agar wood tree. And the resin is produced when the agar wood tree has an infection. So if the tree is not infected, it's just
No.
regular agarwood lifestyle, right? But it's actually only in like the fighting of, right, the
Yes.
resistance to this infection, that this other part of it, right, this other thing it comes out of it, right? This other
Right.
part of it is
Right.
revealed. And what is revealed is pure beauty, right?
Beautiful.
It is the
Beautiful.
essence, right? That
Yeah.
is this liquid gold, right? That
Yes.
comes out of the resistance. So for me, I like to use that as a kind of a metaphor for what Black
Mm.
imagination is and like kind of what that cover was for me. Um, and then, for me, there are also multiple readings of Black imagination, right? Like, there's a kind of a primary reading of, identification through like ethnicity.
Right.
But really for me, it's actually a way of being. It's a way of navigating the world. We all have
Yes.
a
Yes.
Black imagination, right? It is about
Yes.
navigating through the interstitial space. We've been trained to look at the stars, and never curious about what they rest in,
Mm.
what powers them, right? Dark matter. But you actually can't even see the stars except they're on a bed of blackness, right? And that is actually the expansive space. That is the space of like pure potentiality, that we all have access to. And then I think, on another level, you can speak about Black imagination is the result of a confrontation with one's shadow, right? That's again
Mm.
work that we can
Mm.
all do.
Mm.
That there is a beauty that exists on the
Beauty.
other side,
Mm.
of that confrontation, and that's something that I think we individually and collectively, right, as a corporate body, can
Yeah.
experience, right? And I think if we are speaking about America, I think a big part of the beauty that we're missing out on is because there
It's
is a refusal to
beautiful.
actually turn
See
towards
that
the
and
shadow
see it.
because it's
Yeah.
because it's uncertain, right? It's falling, right? It's literally jumping off a cliff. The only thing,
Yes.
everything is falling, right? It's just falling at the same
Right.
rate, so you actually never land. But
Yes.
it's scary, right?
Yeah.
It's
Mm.
scary, but I think for those who have individually do that work, try to do that shadow work, that transmutation, that alchemy, um, discovers that you're right. What an alchemist would say is that is the search, that is the philosopher's stone, right? That
Yes, it
that we
is.
are
Yeah.
taking base metals and turning them into pure gold,
Pure
right? Like
gold.
that
Yes.
is the process. They have this phrase in Latin, aurum nostrum non est aurum vulgi. I may have missed up the order of that, but essentially what it says is our gold is not the common gold. And so that
Oh,
process is this idea of
right.
translating one's baseness, right? Like one could just call it like, what does it mean to exist in a space-time reality? Um, and this constant refinement into like pure gold, right? Like that is the process. Anyway, so I'll stop there.
No, well, the alchemy of that effort is significant. Yeah, that is, it is magical. It is essential. It is
Yeah.
nourishing. It is maybe in many ways is that a requirement of creativity. I wonder.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's a translation, and I think
It,
no, I mean, those are probably rhetorical questions,
right.
but but I feel like that is it. We are all doing it. I
Right.
think it's more a matter of one's conscious awareness of it. We are here to create. That is what
Yes.
your reality
Everything.
is.
Right. That's what
You know what
living
I mean?
is.
Like,
Yeah. That is living.
right?
Yes.
Like we have no choice but to, right? We are
Right.
each independently operating algorithms, and our reality is the output, of that. And the difference, between us and artificial intelligence is what we call the self or the I or whatever has the ability to self
S-
self shift
Shift.
its data set
Yeah.
in
That's
order to
right.
create different outcomes,
Yeah.
right? Like you can actually choose new inputs to create new outputs. And I think
Well,
that's amazing.
and also exist in that liminal space. That I mean, hey, I can't exist in a liminal space.
Oh, yeah, no,
So
no.
I mean, that's alchemy in and of itself. Okay, so this podcast is called This Morning Walk. So,
Mm.
what do you think? Is walking a creative act? Is
Is
walking
walking
in
a
and of
creative
itself?
act? Um, I have two answers at least.
Beautiful, fantastic.
Um, Pardon me. At its most fundamental, walking is a creative act because something is happening. right? Meaning you are placing your feet on the ground, one in front of the other, as David Silver,
Mm,
who's head of the fermentation lab at Noma, says when he speaks about fermentation, like walking, you're really just preventing yourself from falling over and over, right? That is really what walking is stopping yourself
I'm
from falling
obsessed with
over and
him.
over.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
he's amazing.
Oh,
Um, and so, but because your presence is there, right? It becomes an act of creation. You don't know that there may be,
right.
a seed or something in the bottom of your
Your
shoe
shoe.
that when you step on the ground begins to create. So just your presence is an act of creation, whether or not you're conscious of it or not, right? So at its most fundamental, walking is an act of creation, because it is work, right? And
Mm,
work leads to creation. And then I would say walking can be a creative act,
mhm.
um, because it can allow you or one to access other parts of oneself,
Of
or maybe
yourself.
notice things about their environment, right? Um, Kind of like people getting ideas in the shower, right? Like because this other thing is happening, it gives me access to, another part of my brain, right? And so in that regard, and I wouldn't say it's for everyone, right? Sometimes I really walk just to like get some fresh air or to like go to sleep if my mind is racing
Yes.
or, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Um, I usually run. For me, it's really the running that gets me going. Um, but yeah, Einstein took walks, all these people took walks, in order to work out a problem, right? In order
That's right.
to,
Yeah.
or if you're in nature, right? Like
Yes.
nature has all types of messages, right? And so in many ways, it becomes a creative act. Actually, the last Ailey campaign, um, that we just shot maybe about a month ago, that was running, right? Running in the
Mm.
park. And, spring was happening. I saw these gorgeous tulips. And so I started taking photographs of the tulips and I sent it to the costume designer. And I was like, this is what it needs to look like. Like the color
Yes.
palette, everything. Like these things need to look
Right.
like flowers. This is it. And so, yeah, so walking can be a creative act.
Yeah. I think I happen to agree. I also think it's really interesting to look at the various things that transpire because of a walk. We think of pilgrims. It's a spirit, it
Mm,
can be a
mm,
spiritual act. We think of activists taking to the streets to communicate en
mm,
masse together as community. So it ends up
mm,
being,
mm, mm,
can be very personal, can be very collective. But
mm-hmm.
personally, there's alchemy in the act of walking, and so
Mm.
it's a
Yesterday was, sorry to interrupt. Yesterday was
no,
Juneteenth, and the
yes,
woman who got it to be a national holiday walked.
yes. I
So
read that.
sorry to
Yes, no,
interrupt.
no, no, not at all. But I love speaking with you. I love being on set with you, and enjoy our conversations and our friendship. I'm grateful for you to join us. I really appreciate you.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, Libby. It's so great to be back in conversation with you. I always loved our hugs, when you find, like, when you just see
Yes.
when you find your people and, and the body doesn't lie,
Mm,
Um, and so to now be having this conversation literally 4 years later, is kind of wild and
yeah,
excited for the future conversations that we'll have.
we will. Dario, have a wonderful day. And if you happen to go for a walk, stay cool or go late in the day when it's cooled
I know
off.
I
My
have I
gosh.
have my fan out, like it's
Oh my
already
gosh.
hot up here.
Beautiful. Yes. Well, thank you, friend. And next
My
time I'm in New
pleasure.
York, I will go for a walk together.
Oh my God, absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay.
This Morning Walk is a production of Blind Nil Audio, hosted by me, Alex L.
And me, Libby Delana. Produced and edited by Chris Jacobs.
If you find value and meaning in the conversations that Libby and I have, please share the show with a friend and consider leaving a 5-star review. Comments on Apple Podcasts really help us out. When you do that, it introduces this show to a bigger audience. Thank you so much for listening.
You are wonderful. Have a great walk.
The views, information, or opinions expressed in this series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Chip and Joanna Gaines, Blind Nile Audio, nor Magnolia.